So when I opened up the wall,
Yo,
Oh my god. Sorry, guys. Flipping table.
second episode.
it makes more money.
Thumbs up is crazy though. Welcome back to Flipping Tables. We're so excited to have you here. We are your hosts, Fernando and Javi. We hope you guys are having a great day, a great week, and a great everything. Our topic today is fear and anxiety, part 2.
Like Javi said, today we're going to be picking up right where we left off. We're going to be talking about fear and anxiety, but more importantly, how to overcome it.
Exactly. So when I was thinking about this and different examples in the Bible, one that jumped out was Abraham. Abraham in Genesis 20, it says that he's moving to, I think it says he's moving to the south. And he's moving into a land where King Abimelech is ruling over. And he tells his wife, Sarah, out of fear, he tells her, when we get here and people ask what we are to each other, he says, lie, tell them you're my sister. His fear was, if these people find out you're my wife, they're going to kill me. They're going to off me, right? Because they're going to want to take you.
No.
And it was a fear that, like, if God's telling you to go somewhere, go with that obedience and that confidence that he's going to protect you, that he's going to prosper you there. But he went in there with the fear of man, not a fear of God. And we see that his son Isaac did the same thing. A few chapters later in Genesis 26, he did the same thing to the same king, King Abimelech. But this time, King Abimelech, he was a little bit smart. He caught on. Yeah. And he's like, he even goes up to him and says, what possessed you to do this? Like, you're going to get me in trouble with God because you're out here lying and you're fearing for your own life.
To kind of piggyback what you said is like, one of the crazy things is that Abimelech actually took his wife, and it wasn't until, it was revealed to him through a dream where he said, you are a dead man, for that woman you have taken is already married. It wasn't until it was revealed to him. So it's not like he caught him the first time, but he was so close to that. And like you said, he had a good sense of fear of God and who he was, to the point where he's like, oh, snap, like, I'm not doing this.
She's married, so I'm not going to touch
I'm not going to touch that. So that's where you see him actually come in talks to Abraham and says, like, what were you doing? What were you thinking? Why would you do this? Why are you trying to set me up? Type of thing. And it was just a sense of fear of him losing his life. And I think that for some of us, sometimes we come up with something that to us might be like the challenge is so overwhelming, where we're like, whoa, this is impossible. But we forget that it's not going to be us doing the work. We're just vessels.
Right.
It's God doing the work through us, and understanding that that's exactly what we're doing. To me, I feel like sometimes that's the biggest challenge, and it's easier said than done, right? But that is the biggest challenge of it all, to just trust in God and allow him to do the work.
Another character that we see, I think, and maybe the Bible doesn't really describe it as fear, but if I put myself in his shoes, I would be fearful. I would have some fear, and that's Daniel, right? Daniel, but in this case, Daniel overcame that fear, and he overcame that with obedience to God, right? We see that in Daniel 6:6 when, the king had some haters on his team, and they kept trying to find some fault in Daniel and be like, he's too good, but they couldn't find this fault. So they finally said, look, pass a law that nobody can pray to anybody but you.
Exactly.
And the king was like, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. And so he signed off on it.
It's crazy how like they worded everything so that the king felt like, oh yeah, you're doing it to honor me.
Yeah.
When in reality, they were doing it to set
him up. Yeah. And so we see that, and it's like, regardless of the law that was passed, Daniel didn't fear. And Daniel said, I'm not changing the way I live because of this law that goes against, God's laws.
Yep.
And so he still did the same thing. He prayed 3 times a day, and then he didn't do it hidden, right? He didn't go to his basement. Not that there's anything wrong with praying in your basement, but he did it publicly for everybody to see. And that got him in trouble. But then I'm thinking about like, all right, you broke the law of the land, right? Now you're in trouble. Now you're going to get tossed into a lion's den. I mean, as a person, I'm probably going to be like sweating bullets. Probably have a heart attack, to be honest. Like if I get tossed in there, because there's lions and they're going to tear you apart. They're ruthless, right? You're not dead, so it's not like you're still going to feel everything.
Yeah. Well, they rip you to pieces.
They rip you. They bite into you. They claw you, right? So
they're tearing limbs off of you.
It's
a whole different.
A lot of I mean, I would be super scared. Right?
I wouldn't want to be out in the open with a lion, let alone a den of lions. You know what I'm saying? I think it's
trapped in there.
I think sometimes when we read the stories, we tend to just kind of overlook it, especially because I see it in church a lot, when they're teaching the younger kids David and Goliath, Daniel and the lion's den, all this other stuff. They make it look so nice and cute with the little figures. They make
pictures.
They make the lions look like they're so
friendly.
Yeah, friendly lions. Like they were over there petting.
Yeah,
they were petting Daniel to sleep. Rocking him to sleep. But in reality, it's no joke to be in front of a beast like that. And Daniel doesn't seem like the kind of guy who was some sort of hunter, some sort of soldier. He wasn't that type of guy. So for him to be in the lion's den, and for him to be able to overcome it just like that, again, goes to show where his heart was, where his trust was, who he was really believing to carry him through that whole process.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing or a key element is his obedience and not switching up, right? Like his obedience to, regardless of what the law said, I'm still going to pray.
Yeah.
I'm going to pray to God. Regardless what the king offered me, I'm not going to contaminate myself with his food.
I'm not touching it.
I'm not touching it. I'm still going to eat the right thing, right? I'm still going to feed myself the right thing, right? And then once you're in the den with the lions, I don't think Daniel was like cradled up in a little fetal position, crying and cursing God. I don't think that was the case.
Yeah.
And it says that I think he sent angels to shut the mouths of the lions.
Yep.
Right. And even the king was so regretful of his decision that the next morning, like he was the first one there, making sure, like, is he still alive? Did he get eaten? Like, what's the case? But
wanted that update. Like, what happened to him? Show me what happened to him.
He overcame that fear by his obedience, by having faith, and like you said, by knowing who, like who has him, who has his back, who does he belong to.
We talked about Moses and we mentioned Gideon in the last on the first episode of this fear and anxiety. I still want to make mentions of, even though Gideon came from that poor family, the weakest family of it all, despite his status, Gideon still overcame all of the doubts. He overcame all of the fear. He trusted and allowed himself to be used to save Israel from the Midianites. His story really just teaches us how to overcome the fear, to be able to trust in God, but more importantly, to seek Him and to recognize that God is the one that's going to deliver you, that God is the one that's going to use you. And if you allow yourself to trust in that, then you're assured. You're going to have that confidence, like, I'm just here to have a good time. I'm just here to be part of it. It's not really me coming to do something. It's me just being sent to do something. But his ability to overcome that fear and the doubt sometimes goes overlooked again, because people say, well, it was God acting. Yeah, it was God acting, but it takes us taking the first step. I make mentions of this a lot, that you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right? And that concept is normally about you trying to force someone to do something. But God also gives us a lot of opportunities. And if we don't take advantage of those opportunities, sometimes we are the ones that miss out on that blessing. I feel like whether it was Gideon or someone else, God was always still going to come through with his plan.
Yeah.
You know, God's still going to make it happen. If he felt like he was going to deliver Israel, if Gideon didn't do it, he's going to find the next person, next man up type of mentality. You know, he's just going to pick someone else. And if they take that opportunity, God's always going to continue to give his people opportunities. It's up to us to know that God is really giving us an opportunity to be used.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot of, it's not just one way of overcoming fear.
Mm-hmm.
But we see that in the Bible. Maybe it doesn't always highlight fear, but I mean, these people experienced fear, right? They went through things that were probably put them in positions where they had anxiety. Maybe they didn't know what anxiety was, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't know what mental health was back then. But
I didn't know what mental health was
years ago.
until just yesterday. I was 10 years old, you know?
Exactly. So, but we can't just assume that they didn't experience these things. You know, they did. And Gideon, like you said, he overcame it with assurance in God.
Yeah.
Moses, he overcame fear through his trust and essentially trusting God, that God, like you said, he's just a vessel and God's going to use me.
Yeah.
Right? Because he went back and forth, and we touched on this already, where he's going back and forth to God, like, I'm not the right man. God's like, yes, you are. Nah, I'm not but at the end of the day, he's, God's like, tell them this. And he goes to Aaron, God wants you to say this.
Yeah.
And then Aaron says it, and it's happening, right? They're seeing it right before their very eyes. So I feel like that, if once you start acting in faith, once you start trusting God, and God starts backing you up, essentially, or fulfilling the things that he said, then you have, that changes. You're like, okay, I shouldn't fear what I think I'm capable of doing, but what he's gonna enable me to do.
Exactly. And one of the things that stands up to me when I'm looking at or comparing Gideon with Moses, right, is that Gideon had to make moves based on what he was being told, and just trusting in God's assurance for it, where Moses had that assurance, but he also had that provision where he was given the opportunity to bring Aaron in. So he's not doing everything on his own, And sometimes the word says it's not good for men to be alone, right? But that goes to speak on having the right people surrounding you, relationships, people who are going to build you up. When you have people who, a good sphere of influence, you know that you can lean on them. You feel more confident to do what your purpose is, to walk in your purpose when you have a good group of guys around you that you can lean on, that you can depend on. The guys who are going to pick you up when you start to stumble and you start to fall, that they're going to be there to pick you up and lift you up and kind of move you through that and help you through specific steps, right? I see that in the sense that Moses had someone with him. Gideon had to do it on his own. But nevertheless, it always goes back to trusting in God and having that assurance that God is the one making it happen.
Yeah.
Another guy who I want to bring up is Ananias, right? This is back when Saul was going around, persecuting all Christians, killing Christians. And then Ananias, and we see this in the book of Acts, right? It's in chapter 9, the story. And Ananias is called because Saul had been blinded. And he said, he's told to go and to heal Saul, who's now known as Paul, right? After the healing. So he goes and he does it. But again, the fear that sets in. This is a guy who is killing the followers of Jesus. So for you to say, hey, go and talk to this guy, go and present yourself to him. If I'm Ananias, the first thing that crosses my mind is like, hold on, why am I going to walk up to the guy who's hunting me? This guy's hunting us all down, and you're asking me to go to him instead of him coming to look for me? That's a death wish. Yeah, that's a trap. Like, why am I being set up?
It's like you being told, like, I don't know if I should say it, but it's like you being told, hey, Fernando, I think you need to go deliver a message to El Chapo.
Exactly.
Like,
the only difference
are you going to want to do it? Or
the only difference to add on to that is if Chapo already hated me.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if I already had a target in my back and he's been looking for me, but it's almost to that level. I would say that Gideon, Ananias' version is a little bit more difficult because Chapo doesn't hate me. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't even know I exist. He doesn't know who I am. But if he did know me and wanted to take me out, now we have a problem. Now it's real. It's scary enough to go walk up to El Chapo, but it's even worse if he's already looking for him.
Yeah.
And that's the case that he was in. But nevertheless, again, obedience, right? He obeyed God's command. He goes out and he heals Saul. He allows himself to be used to heal him. But more importantly, he is playing a crucial role in the transformation of Saul, transforming him into Paul, right? Mm-hmm. Who now we know played a big part of the foundation of where we're standing now, what we're doing now in our faith. Yeah. But the story goes to prove that you can have your faith, and faith can be a powerful tool to overcome everything that you need to be able to overcome, especially when fear is creeping in, especially when anxiety is creeping in. Your faith is going to be something that pulls you through.
Yeah, I like that because, and I guess just to say this too, like it's okay to have a little, I don't want to say challenge God, but we'll have that little bit back and forth sometimes with God. Like, are you sure? Like, you're calling me? Are you sure you really want me?
You're going to give him that side eye every
now. Yeah, you're like, are you sure that's the person I have to, go talk to or share this with? Are you sure you're calling me to this ministry? And it's okay because we even see it with Ananias, right? When the Lord called him and he told him what to do. And then in verse 13, he says, but Lord, I've heard many people talk about the terrible things this man has done to the believers in Jerusalem. And he is authorized by the leading priest to arrest anyone who calls upon your name. So he's like, you're telling me to do something that's going to get me caught up too. But God, God persists. He's like, now I'm telling you to do this, So in verse 17, that's sort of where his faith conquered his fear. Because it says, so Ananias went and found Saul. He laid his hands on him and said, brother Saul, the Lord Jesus who appeared to you on the road has sent me so that you might regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And so his obedience, his faith in saying, okay, God, said to do this, so I'm going to go and do this. And he, once he's there, like that fear is gone.
Yep.
And he's doing what God, he's practicing what God is telling him to do and delivering that message that God is telling him to deliver.
Yep. The next guy we have up here is we have Peter. Now, Peter was a disciple of Jesus. He loved Jesus, right? But even when he kept telling Jesus how much he loved him, Jesus was the first one to say, sure, but you're going to deny me 3 times. And sure enough, when push comes to shove, and Jesus being mistreated, well, let's call it what it is, right? He's being slapped, spat on, beaten, you name it, he went through it. And he's getting ready to be killed, and people start saying, wait, aren't you that guy? Aren't you his follower? Aren't you the one who was always with him? And he says, no. He allowed the fear of being next to Jesus, hung on another cross next to Jesus. He allowed that fear to set in, and he denies him, right? He denies him all 3 times, just like Jesus says. Everybody knows the story. We all hear the rooster crow and everything. But the focal point of what we're trying to talk about is that he didn't allow that to identify who he was. That was not his identity. Mm-hmm. He was called with a purpose. Jesus called him to go and to spread the gospel, right? He didn't allow his failure or the fear of getting caught in his failure to stop him from doing what he was supposed to do. If anything, that's what turned him around. That's what gave him more confidence. That's what gave him more courage to go and like, you know what? Now I have to really step up my game and really get to the next level, He overcame his fear, and that failure actually allowed him to grow and to be stronger in his faith. Right?
Yeah. I think it's key because a lot of times we allow a mistake that we may have made in the past or that we keep on making to, at the end of the day, deter us from seeking God and getting closer to God and continuing to walk in his path, right? Like if God had said, hey, Fernando, you're going to be the youth leader, but you still messed up every now and then in some areas in your life, and you're like, I don't feel worthy, right? Or I'm afraid of the calling. We've mentioned that a few times where I think in the testimonies one where it was like, I was told this, but I was honestly afraid of the commitment and I didn't want to accept that. Or I was afraid of what, if I accepted that, how my life was supposed to be lived, essentially. So not letting your mistakes of your past define you, and at the end of the day, Jesus, and God can restore us. And just like he restored him, because he denied him 3 times. And then Jesus, when he talks to him again, he asks him, do you love me? He says, yes. Do you love me? Yes. On 3 occasions, he asked him. So he restored him for every denial that he did. He restored him again.
I think it's key to say too that God doesn't always call the equipped, the ones who are ready, the ones who are superstars, the playmakers. He doesn't always go to free agency and pick up all his guys. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes he's going to go to those later rounds and he's going to find the diamonds in the rough and he's going to equip them and give them all the tools that they need in order to put them in positions that he wants them in. And I think that sometimes that, like Gideon, who said, oh, but I come from nothing. Sometimes, especially as a leader, right? That's the mindset that sometimes wants to creep up on you and say, well, I don't come from a family who's like deep into the word, and a family that preaches and teaches and all that stuff. How am I going to do that? How do you expect me to do it? Moses was afraid to speak in public, right? But at the same time, as a leader, it all goes back, to overcoming your fear, just having the courage to be obedient. It's, I say, you have to have obedience, but sometimes it requires a lot of courage to be obedient.
Right.
It's one thing to obey, but if there's no fear, there's no challenge. When the challenge presents itself, it takes a whole lot of courage to overcome that sort of stuff. And I feel like in leadership and in life, you're going to have tasks that are difficult, tasks and things that are put in place for you to do that. When you're called to do it, you're going to start questioning your skills. You're going to start questioning your education. You're going to start questioning, and this also applies not just in spiritual life, right, but in the secular world as well, like what we do for work and all this other stuff. You're going to start being challenged. But the reality is that when you admit and you humble yourself and say, okay, I do not know how to do this, but I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and then you start putting in the work. Maybe you don't immediately resolve every task, every problem, but you start to dive in to whatever the problem is, right? Figuring out how it goes, looking at resources, figuring out what it is, taking yourself to a whole nother level. You can do that in scripture, just like you can do it at your job. You can do it in school, just like you could do it in scripture. So it's really just a matter of being able to have the courage to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to step up. And that's really what it normally just takes. You have to step up. And you have to be willing to just swing for the fences and give it everything you got.
Yeah. I think sometimes too in life, it's happened to me a few times where you have this fear, or you're dealing with anxiety, or the anxiety that fear might bring on, because again, we don't know the outcome, but we're overthinking a lot of things. If this person reacts like this, what am I going to do next? And how should I react? How should I approach this situation? And it's like when God's like, hey, this is what you got to do. And then, like Ananias, right? If he's just sat there and overthought everything, and he's like, man, like if he gets up and he swings on me, or what if he wasn't blind and he actually can see, and then it's just a trap because and now you're overthinking, and now you're playing these fake scenarios in your head that brings on more fear, that brings on more anxiety. And I think in my personal life, sometimes at work, when you have to have those tough conversations with the client, or maybe with another agent, right? Maybe some people might not get this, but it's like, hey, appraisal came in low, and we're going to have to bring this price down. You're like, well, what if this guy's like, no, my client wants this and they're set, and my client doesn't, but my buyer doesn't have the money. And now instead of just having that conversation, hey, this is what it is. A lot of times when I've felt like that, I'm just like, I'm kind of not looking, but I'm dialing and I just hit call. Now it's ringing. Now I have to have that conversation. And when I have that conversation, hey man, this and this and this, all right, no problem, send it over.
Yeah. And the whole relief just comes over you, and you're like, man.
Right. I hang up. Yeah, I hang up, and I'm like, it was that simple. Like I'm playing myself, And
the crazy part is that happens in all industries. Like the construction side of things, sometimes you can only estimate and give people prices on things that you can see,
right?
Things that you're expecting, right? But once you open up a wall, anything can come up, anything can come across. I remember when we were doing our kitchen, the whole goal was, Kenny was like, can you open up a wall? Can you open this wall? I just want to do this. I want to do that. I just want to get an idea of what it's going to look like. So when I opened up the wall, I found some live wires in it, and I tested them, and they were hot. I went to the circuit breaker trying to figure out what it was. Couldn't figure out what's turning what off. So eventually what I ended up doing was gutting the entire kitchen and redoing the entire thing. Now, for me, I could do that because it's my house, it's my budget, and I know what I can and can't do. But when you're at somebody else's house and you start to encounter stuff like that, at that point, you're just like, okay, what are we doing? Just capping it? Are we just going to leave the wire in there and just putting a junction box? But then I have to put an access panel. Now it becomes aesthetically not pleasing to have a big old white box inside. So people start to panic, trying to figure out what's going to happen instead of just having that simple conversation. In that industry, nickel and diming people is like a big thing, right? So people are always fearful of having that conversation. And a lot of that stuff comes with just having the courage to say, hey, listen, I opened up the wall, found this. The first thing that they're going to ask is like, oh, how much is that going to cost? And then you give them one, option 2, option 3. Let's go with option 3. Boom, all done. And I've seen it. I grew up doing this, right? And I saw it where most guys would be like, you know what? I'll just do it. I'll eat the cost. Just because they want to avoid the conversation.
They don't want to have that convo, yeah.
And it's like, and I saw it for years. And I would always ask, like, why not just ask them? But again, it's always that fear. Oh, what if I lose a client? What if they think I'm just trying to make stuff up? And it's like, you have to be able to overcome those things. You have to be able to overcome them because it makes you a better person when you start doing it. And I'm sure that in your line of work, the first one was tough. The second one was tough. Once you learn your lesson, like, yo, this is a lot easier than I actually thought it was, you start making those phone calls.
Yeah.
You might have to take a deep breath before you do it because it's, again, the fear's not going to go nowhere.
Right.
But doesn't mean that you have to be afraid of those phone calls.
Yeah. And I think if we kind of turn it back to, the spiritual side of things, I think Jesus was the prime example, right? The way he lived his life in complete obedience.
Yeah.
He came being, a holy being in heaven. He was sent down here and made human.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like he had a hard life. He lived, he went through some of the things we might have gone through, but probably 10 times worse or 100 times worse. And no matter what he was going through, it was always his will, not mine.
Not mine, yep.
And how many times can we say that we've said that and actually meant it, right?
Exactly.
Like, God, your will, not mine. But secretly, like, nah, let it be my will, because I'm going to enjoy this one a little bit more.
Can you make my will your will?
Yeah, exactly. And so it was like, I think that's the prime example, because even, before he was crucified and he went to,
Mount Sinai.
Yeah, Mount Sinai. And we see this in Luke chapter 22. He's pleading to the Father. He says, Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. So he didn't want to suffer just like we don't want to suffer.
Exactly.
He didn't want to have to go through that pain. But that was like his body, his human body. Like, I don't want to be pierced. I don't want to be, crucified. I don't want to get tortured. But if we see it in that same sentence, in that same breath, he prayed. He said, "Not my will, but yours." Right. So it's like that's the prime example of how to overcome fear. Yeah, it's the same thing we just said. I'm scared to have that conversation. Take a deep breath, and I have it.
Do it.
Right. It's the same thing. And that's how we overcome it, with assurance from God, with our faith, with having trust in him that he's gonna see us through. And that at the end of the day, it's his will. It's
Yep.
not our will.
Yeah. And having that determination, right? Having that determination that this is what I chose to do. I chose to follow him.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes I feel like we see the example, but because we don't follow the example to the T, to every single dot, we don't cross every T, dot every I, we start to doubt ourselves. Well, maybe I can't even follow him, you know, or maybe I don't want to follow him, or maybe I don't need to follow him now. But when you have that assurance and you remind yourself, like, hey, this was the decision I made. I'm going to follow him to thick and thin, whether it's getting hard or whether it's easy. I'm going to do what I'm called to do.
Mm-hmm.
Having that conviction in your heart, that's what you want to do. That's the conviction that he had when he left his throne, you know? And I feel like sometimes that's what we need, because that's having that mentality is what pushes us to obedience. And when we're determined to be obedient, that's when we can build up the courage to do what we're called to do, you know? And I think that's like the biggest thing that I can take away from all these examples. All these guys that we've mentioned, you know, we talked about Peter, right? We talked about Ananias, Gideon, Moses. We talked about Daniel, right? And Isaac and Abraham. They all had their own challenges. And as leaders, as men, as a father, as a youth pastor, as a teacher, I'm going to have my own fears and I'm going to have my own obstacles that I have to overcome. But being courageous and obedience, these are the essential things that we're going to need as men to be able to overcome the things that we're going to be facing in life, whether we've already faced some or we're going to face new ones. You can kind of look at the whole picture of it all, and those are the key elements that you need and that we've needed and that we're going to need in the future to be able to overcome everything that we're going to be facing.
I like that. Also, if I can add something, is when I was just looking back over this and thinking about it, you know, all these guys are talking to God or are receiving instructions from God directly, right? And I think a lot of times we allow that fear to creep in because we're not listening to his voice.
Yep.
And we're listening to our own voice.
Yep.
And we're like, Javi, you didn't finish college.
Yep.
You know, you don't have a degree in nothing.
Exactly.
So how are you going to be this successful?
Yep.
Right. And one thing, I mean, for me, I think I said that in the earlier episodes where I was like, you know, my brother he went to school and he graduated and I'm proud of him. That wasn't the path that I took.
Yep.
Right. Because I didn't think that was for me, but I don't let that stop me from, you know, saying I can't be successful in this life. Right. But I think we have to have that, or I know we have to have that communication with God. I can't let my thoughts, even, you know, I think this last week or the last few days where I felt like business kind of slowed down. I started off hot. Everybody's like, hey, bro, good job. Like, you're killing it. And I'm like, dang, like, where's the next one? You know, like now I'm kind of low or it's slow. And now it's like, man, am I really going to kill it this year? You know, and I'm thinking this, right? And after being like, no, like God already spoke to me. God already promised this for me. And so having those fears, having those doubts, they're going to creep in, but having the resources or the tools to overcome it. And again, they are talking to God. Moses is getting instructions from God. Daniel, he had the certainty and assurance to speak to God 3 times a day, right? Like, Ananias too, he's getting the instructions from God. Peter, the same thing. God, you know, he's having face-to-face conversations with God even after he denied him. So it's key. It's a key element to continue to have that open line with Jesus, right? In prayer, through reading his word, through, you know, meditating with him in our quiet time. Because I think that's where he's gonna come through. That's where he's gonna come through for us. In the quiet is where he's going to speak to us.
And then, like, my final thought on this too is this: that one thing that's also going to help you, right? I told you what we need to get through things, but keeping your eyes on the finish line, keeping your eyes on the prize, you know? And what I mean by that is I made mentions that I have a fear of heights, but I'll go on a 40-foot ladder in a heartbeat if I'm getting paid for it, right? And we laughed at it, but the truth of the matter is that there's an incentive to get up that ladder. For us, we have an incentive, right? The promise in the gift of salvation, knowing that serving Jesus is not just to serve and to say that I can talk all I want. It's really to say, he brought me this far and I know where I'm going. You know, I know what my goal is, you know, and having that is always going to be something that allows you to continue to just push through, you know, and I think that that's been my biggest thing is knowing that I am called to do something. And when the fear starts to kick in, it's about going to the drawing board and saying, okay, this is where I'm at. This is where I'm being sent to go. What's the reasoning behind it? What is the outcome that's going to come out of it? Okay, I see the outcome. I see where I'm going. I see where I'm expected. I'm going to go put in work. And sometimes, you know, it doesn't come out perfect. Sometimes I'm not great at it. You know, sometimes I'm not good at it. But with being persistent, those skills build up. And like I said earlier, he doesn't call those who are already equipped, but he will equip those he calls. You know, so I think that's something that we can always lean on and always trust him, that he's going to be there for us. He's always going to have our back.
Amen. All right, guys. So thank you guys for tuning in this week. We pray that this message blesses you as much as it's blessing us. So please share it with a friend.
Please don't forget to like it, to comment, and to subscribe. Hit that little notification. And we'll see you guys next week. So when I opened up the wall, I find a bunch of wires just hanging there, right? And they're all old, but they're just hanging in the wall. So I literally grabbed my tester and I was like, and they're hot, live wires, 240 volt wires. I'm like, how did this house not catch on fire? At that point, I didn't trust the house. There was already upgrades that we're thinking of, but then I opened the next wall and I found more. And I was like, forget it. I'm getting the whole thing. I'm going to have to rewire this whole kitchen because I don't trust this. And I don't know where the circuits are. I tried testing them, doing everything. The point being is that sometimes I have no idea where I'm going with this. I lost my whole train of thought.
The fear of like something being so simple or having those conversations or whatever.
Yeah. That's where I was going. You know, I'm over there telling the whole story of the kitchen. It was like, you're like, where am I going with the whole story of the kitchen?
I was like, wait, how's it going to go back? I was thinking that.
I wasn't even know where I was going with it. I was like, why did I even bring this up? All right, so at the wall.